Boy, this Jesus we follow is some kind of a crazy radical, isn't he? This is a little different than what I learned about Jesus when I was growing up. I learned most of my faith back in the 70s, and at that time, we learned about what I call hippie Jesus. He had the long hair and the beard and the sandals and peace and joy and love and the meek shall inherit the earth and a lot of kumbaya stuff. But today's gospel is different. Today's gospel is radical. Now, both aspects of Jesus are true. He is peaceful and meek and mild, but he's also a radical in what he asks of us. So both parts of that are true. I don't know anything about the kumbaya. That's not in any of the Latin dictionaries. Our gospel reading today has two radical things in it, and right before this gospel is another radical thing. Right before this gospel is the part where I did not come to bring peace but a sword. That's radical. Today he says, I'm more important than your family is. Whoa, that's radical. We've all been taught that nothing is more important than our family. In Jesus' time, this was even more true because nothing was more important than the family and your tribe, because in that time there were no social services. When you got old and couldn't work anymore, if you didn't have a son to support you, you would starve to death, or you would have to beg for your living if you could still do that. Jesus says, I'm more important than that. And that's radical. Does that mean that we don't have an obligation to take care of our parents, our kids, or honor our father and mother? No, of course not. That is important. Jesus is just saying he is more important than our family is. He's using a human term, something we understand the importance of family. He's saying, I am more important than that, or else you are not worthy of me. The second radical statement he makes in today's gospel is that whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. And if you think about that, that's kind of radical too. The way we've been brought up in this society is if you've got a cross, there's a pharmaceutical product for that, or a technological fix. Jesus is saying, no, there are some crosses you have to carry. One of my favorite statues I've ever seen is in a little nondescript church, rundown church in the middle of Rome. In the back of that church, there's a wooden statue of Padre Pio. Now, most of you know who Padre Pio is, but if you don't, he was one of our most famous recent saints. Many miracles happened with and through him. And Padre Pio was probably most famous for having the stigmata, which is he had the wounds of Jesus, the nail prints in his hands and in his feet. He had the lance wound in his side. He even had the bruised and torn shoulder that Jesus had from carrying the cross. And he said that was the most painful wound of all. These stigmata were the cross that God selected for Pio to make of him a great saint. And this statue that I saw depicted this figuratively. This statue that I saw was a picture of an old and weak Padre Pio struggling to carry a massive, heavy cross. And on the front of that cross, there was a tall and strong Jesus carrying the other end of the cross, and Jesus is looking over his shoulder and saying, come on, Pio, we got this. And what made me fall in love with this cross, with this statue, was the way the artist captured Pio's response. The look in Pio's eyes and on his face. It said, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. I can carry this cross with your help. And that's how you carry a cross, with Jesus' help. Now, Jesus does not say that we're supposed to go around looking for crosses. He doesn't say we even have to like it. He's just saying there are some crosses you have to carry. I have my own expression about this. I say that to be an adult means that you got to learn to take your licks. I never tell that to other people. I tell that to myself when life deals out the licks. And we've all dealt with various problems. We've all experienced death and disease, family problems, psychological problems, financial problems. That's just part of life. And what Jesus is telling us is, when it comes right down to it and that cross is laying on your shoulder and you can't get rid of it, just pick the thing up and go. And He'll help us. And that's radical. There's a good example of radical Christianity that I saw this last weekend. We were in northern Indiana for a wedding, and we had some extra time, so we toured around the Amish country, which was there. And we always like to visit the Amish country because it's always so beautiful. And we've done this before, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about the Amish. Why do they do what they do? You know, they've got the funny little chin beards and the straw hats, and the women wear these pastel dresses, and they have huge families, and they ride around in their horse-drawn buggies, and they farm with horses. Like, why do they do that? Do they hate technology? No. Do they hate the wealth that a good tractor might bring them on their farm? No, they don't hate that either. What they're doing is they're being intentional in their faith. They're saying, in their understanding of the faith, those sorts of things might make them proud and they need to be humble. So they willingly carry this cross of old technology in order to serve their God. They're being intentional in their faith. We used to be radical Christians, we Catholics. We used to have pictures and statues of religious figures in our home. We had smells and we had bells. We had these nuns that sat in the front row you couldn't see anything but their face. We even worshiped in a language that nobody understood. We stuck out like a sore thumb. We stuck out like the Amish do now. And at some point we decided, well, we don't want to stick out like that much anymore. We want to become more like everybody else, and maybe they'll like us more, and maybe more people will become Catholic. Well, that didn't work out so well. We got swallowed up by the world. And now the pollsters tell us that they can't detect anything distinct or unique about Catholics when they poll us. We have the same size families. We have the same feelings and thoughts about issues of the day. We vote the same way as the rest of the world. We have the same families. We even have only 40% of us even believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. We've been swallowed alive by the world. A really good example of fitting into the world, just this last Tuesday, I was driving home from work, and I was punching through the stations, and I came to National Public Radio. They were interviewing some guy, I'm not sure about what. I came in the middle of it, but apparently he was some spiritual or religious leader, and he told the interviewer that, yeah, he was a gay atheist climate change activist who went to divinity school. They both had a good chuckle about that. I was disgusted, so I turned the channel. I don't know what else they were talking about, but I would ask you, who is the radical here? Is the radical the Amish farmer who's living his faith 24/7, who hitches up his horse and drives it to town and wastes a half a day doing that when he could get in a pickup and be there in a half an hour? Is he the radical? Or is the gay atheist climate change denier who's leading a Christian congregation somewhere the radical? And I would say that second person has been swallowed up by the world, and that first person is living their faith as best they can, who's being a radical Christian for a radical Jesus. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do in today's gospel reading. He's asking us to become radical Catholics, to do radical things, to stick out, to be a Catholic 24/7, not just an hour on weekends. He wants us to be Amish Catholics, in other words. He wants us to carry our cross without complaining too much. He wants us to be intentional in our faith, not sloppy in our faith, not just practicing it because That's the way we were raised, but we're intentional. This is our faith, and this is how we live it. And our antiphon today, St. Peter tells us why we should do this. 1 Peter, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Announce the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Amen.